Okay, guys, we are live with the Wingin It Podcast, which is going to be a weekly show covering everything from football to boxing to MMA, anything relating to sport. We're the place to be. Today, I'm joined by Ben, who's probably going to be joining me on most weeks, along with a few other special guests. Want to introduce yourself?
Hello. I'm Ben. I am sport fanatic. I've grown up around sport, love talking about sport. Quite comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. Really looking forward to contributing to the Winging It podcast and watching it grow and helping it grow.
Absolutely. So I suppose that there's only one real place to start, really. It's VAR.
VAR.
Where do we even start?
I don't know. I don't think the pundits know. I don't think the fans know. The players don't know. It's a minefield, and it's brought in to improve decisions and performances on referees, but it's not even doing that. Even the decisions that they are making, they're not clear cut. They're still debated. It's
This is the thing, because during the World Cup, you had people like Ian Wright, Alan Shearer, the people like the respected pundits were saying no, this isn't right. They have to get it perfect before it comes into the Premier League. But now they're all for it. So how much money has ended up either landed in their back pocket, or how have they been brainwashed into believing that this is the right thing to bring the Premier League forward?
do you know
Because
it's a difficult one because ultimately if you're a team fighting for fighting to avoid relegation, or you're trying to get into the top four or win the league, or whatever front you're fighting on, your individual cause as a football club, as a fan, you want the big calls to be right. You want them to be right. So if VAR was getting rid of the grey area, making it black and white. Yes, that's a goal. No, that's not a goal. Yes, that's a foul. No, that's not a foul. And it was absolutely factually correct. Then, wherever you end up, you can accept, I guess. But even now, there's still debate. It's not cut and dry. Some of the decisions are right. Some of the decisions are wrong. I mean, even if you look at the West Ham Man City game that happened on the weekend, to the naked eye, both of Man City's goals that were disallowed by VAR looked offside. I think Jesus's goal was a lot tighter than Sterling's goal. Sterling's goal to me was offside. I think the VAR was stopped fractionally before the ball was played, and it's just not helping out. There's still the talking point, but now we're talking about situations that we would have spoken about historically, but they're supposed to be factually correct, cut and dry. Yes, that was offside. No, it wasn't, and it's still not cut and dry. I don't think its concept has been
The
proven.
Sterling goal was definitely an interesting one, because from what I saw when I was watching the replays, it didn't seem offside, or if it was offside, it looked like it was offside by like literally not even a shoulder, less than that. Now I know that the rule for offside is obviously it's any part of the body you can score with, but like even the West Ham fans didn't agree with it, because I've spoken to a few West Ham fans and they were like, well, we were at the game, it looked onside. But
It's
luckily he got the last goal in the last minute and got his hat trick on the first day of the season. But I don't see past Man City for the league this season.
I think it's going to be it's going to be a difficult task to stop them for sure. Absolutely, they picked up exactly where they left off last season. I know everybody's talking about the lead that Liverpool had towards the end of the season last year, and Liverpool lost the title. But if you go as far back as last season, Manchester City won 15 games in a row. They won 15 games in a row. They won that league as much as Liverpool lost it. And they've just picked up where they left off. To be honest, I think Mourinho coined a phrase that was a bit of a dig to United, no doubt, about which teams can compete for the title. And he said Manchester City, Liverpool, Tottenham, and Manchester City's B team.
Yeah, I did that. I was watching that. I was watching that. That was typical Mourinho. to have a little dig. But what I did find funny about Mourinho being a pundit on Sky Sports is that he's no longer his manager, but Mourinho is still bullying Luke Shaw. It's incredible. You can't write it for him to be on Sky Sports saying that Maguire is going to have to cover up on the left side a lot of the time because Luke Shaw goes missing. But if that was the case while you were manager, why did you still play him?
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, no, I mean, moving away from the Premier League. I mean, we got the Super Cup tonight, which is between Liverpool and Chelsea. And personally, looking at the two teams and the way that pre-season's gone and things like that, I could see it being a cricket score for Liverpool. I can't see Chelsea doing anywhere close to what they should be doing in that game.
Do you know what? As much as it pains me to say, because I've got a friend who's a Chelsea fan, and she'll hate me for even thinking ill of Chelsea. I just can't see. I just can't see where they're going to get enough goals, and I can't see how they're going to prevent Liverpool from scoring. It's a difficult task anyway. But if you look at the performance of the centre back pairing against United, you had Christiansen and you had Zuma. I think to describe it as shaky is, kind of an underestimation. It's just not a centre back pairing that's going to keep out many Premier League teams, let alone a team that's as free scoring as Liverpool.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the two sides and compare them, Alisson is arguably better than Kepa. Clearly, he's got the trophies. He's won the Copa America. And if you look at the Chelsea attack versus the Liverpool attack, Olivier Giroud has always been known for coming off the bench and getting you a goal when you need it. He's not the kind of player, getting to hit the age that he is now as well, he's not the player that's going to be able to play 90 minutes and get you 2 or 3 goals, do the running, drop in, help out with the midfield. It's just not going to happen for him. And Tammy Abraham is inexperienced. So in terms of their strike force, they are very limited. They can't sign anyone. They've kind of brought in Pulisic to essentially try and replace Hazard, which is not going to happen because he needs to get acclimatized to the league. And even after he's done that, has he really got the same ability? There's just so many questions over this Chelsea team, and I really do think that they are really going to struggle to even make top 6 this season.
I wouldn't be surprised if they fell out of contention for Europe for sure. The transfer embargo hasn't helped. It certainly hasn't helped. But then, kind of looking at it from a kind of operational and business management perspective, if you know that you can't sign players, for the next 2 windows, 3 windows, 4 windows, whatever it ends up being, surely what you've got to then do is then manage the players that you have at the club already. Look, Hazard obviously wanted to go. There was no secret of it. There's been speculation about Hazard leaving Chelsea for as long as I can remember. If he doesn't want to be there, then you can't really keep him there. But I look at someone like David Luiz, for example, deadline day signing for Arsenal, and at a snip as well. £8 million for a central defender with the experience that he's got playing in kind of European leagues across Europe, hence the European leagues. I just don't see how they can let people like Luiz go and expect to get bigger performances from some of their lesser known players. Look, I'm all about giving people a chance, and as you said, people need to acclimatise to the Premier League. It's a much more physical league than any reserve team football and the majority of other European leagues. But I just can't see how they've allowed themselves to get into a position where they've got a lot of outgoings, no incomings at all. But there's no goals in their team now. I feel harsh saying it, because if you look at their performance against Manchester United, for the first 25, 30 minutes, they could have been 2-0 up. It's a completely different game. But I think their inexperience showed. Shocking tackle from Zuma. Rashford put the penalty away. It's a great penalty, by the way. And it just kind of went downhill from there. I think at any level, when you can see 2 goals in 20 seconds, it's going to be difficult to come back from. But I do think that they, played better than I thought they would. But looking at the season as a whole, and tonight certainly, I just can't see how they're not going to win the Super Cup. I'll be so surprised if they do. I will publicly apologise to all of the listeners if Chelsea pull off a shock result today. But I just can't see how they're going to pick up enough points to stay in the top six, because the teams around the top six really strengthened as well.
Yeah, but it's not even, you're not really, at this point, you're not even looking at the top six. You're going to be looking at teams like Wolves and Leicester. Maybe potentially even West Ham, if they can get the team clicking together. But you look at you've got, let's say top four. You're looking at Man City, Liverpool, Spurs. That fourth spot will probably be contested by Manchester United or Arsenal.
Manchester United.
the sixth spot, you're looking at a host of teams that are more than capable of getting there. You've got Watford, you've got Leicester, you've got Wolves,
Everton,
who have spent big this summer, so I would imagine they'll be expecting Europe at the end of the season. You've also got teams like West Ham who they might make it, they might not. Nobody really knows, because West Ham's always been a bit of an up and down club, so you don't know whether they're going to end up in the Europa League or end up in the relegation places. It all depends. It all depends on how the players perform on the day. But it's going to be definitely going to be a tough season for Chelsea. But the thing is, they would have had prior warning that there is an impending transfer ban.
For sure.
Barcelona had the same thing. And this is when they went out and bought Luis Suarez. And when they bought out 5 or 6 players in one window. Because then they were banned for the next 2 windows. They couldn't sign anyone. So they had the plan in place. Let's go out and spend £300 million this window. Because we can't spend nothing for the next 2 windows. So whatever money we spend, we're going to recoup by not spending any money in the next 2 windows anyway.
Sure, exactly.
And if Chelsea have known for at least a year, because the transfer deals like such as the one as Hazard, they are not done in one window. There is ongoing discussions between the two clubs for a lengthy amount of time before the contracts are signed and the players transferred.
Sure.
So Chelsea already knew that Hazard was going. So for me, it's a question of what is going on behind the scenes at Chelsea for them to have not arranged to sign a replacement. And if they are considering Pulisic as their replacement for Hazard, what is going on with their recruitment? Because you cannot expect a young American winger who has played second fiddle to Sancho last season at Borussia Dortmund to come in and replace Hazard and be that number one guy at the club.
No, for sure. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think, if you're looking towards the future, there's an argument to say that Pulisic would be a good investment. There's every possibility that he can become a top class player, but he's certainly not a top class player right now. And it's always going to be difficult to replace kind of enigma like Eden Hazard. Like him or loathe him, his stats speak for themselves. He scores goals, he creates goals. But if as you said, if you know that you're losing Hazard, at what point do you then, decide that you can replace him with a development opportunity, a development project, and only one player as well? They didn't necessarily get the money that they could have got for Hazard. If you look at the extortionate transfer fees that are being paid by, even minnows in some of the European leagues, they didn't really get top dollar for Hazard, so it was always going to be difficult to replace him. But as you said, you've got to forecast better. I've always thought that Chelsea are a poorly run club. Great players. They've had every success. The period between, I think it was 2004 and 2010, I think they won the league 3 times. So it works to an extent, but I think Maurizio Sarri didn't help. His kind of management was questionable anyway. And perhaps if they had a different manager at the helm, a couple of seasons ago, then they may be in a better position than they are now. But I just think I feel for Frank Lampard, because I always want to see, the people that I grew up watching, as they take their steps into management. I want to see them do well. it doesn't matter if you're a Lampard fan or a Gerrard fan. It doesn't matter. But it's nice to see those players take that step into management and do well. I think he done a good job at Derby. Derby are a very, very, very well run club. It doesn't matter who's in charge.
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up on that one, I mean, for me, you as someone working within Chelsea Football Club, you're always going to have an issue when your owner can't even get in the country. The guy that's supposed to be funding the club and making decisions can't get in the country. That's your first problem straight away. So he's now leaving the club in charge of people that might not make the same decisions that he would make. And you can see the difference in the last 3 or 4 years since he's been struggling with his visa issues, is that the people that are making decisions aren't making the same decisions that Roman Abramovich would make, because he would have gone out and spent the money that he needed to spend on players. And the whole thing about Maurizio Sarri is he wasn't a Chelsea manager. He wasn't someone that gone with the fans. He wasn't someone that gone with the players.
Yeah,
and for me, looking at the way their season ended, it really did seem like the players went out and secured fourth place, and then won the Europa League just to spite him. It wasn't because they were fighting for the club. It just seemed to be a kind of a message to the manager saying, look, we can do this before without you. It doesn't really bother us.
No, sure. I mean, if you're smoking 200 cigarettes a day, how do you have the time to manage a football team? It's sad. It's sad. I'm a London boy. I want London clubs to do well. And I'd love to sit here and tell you. Go on.
Apart from Millwall.
I mean, I'm a Charlton fan, so I don't really have any rivals, to be honest. I think our biggest rivals are Crystal Palace, and there's a fair amount of distance between us geographically, and also our kind of performances on the pitch, the maturity of our clubs. The less said about owners at the moment, the better. Certainly supporting Charlton against Roman Duchelet 100%. But I like to see our home clubs do well.
That is an interesting argument though, because you got promoted last season. You have spent money during the summer to bring players in, and you're kind of sitting pretty in the Championship at the moment.
I mean, we've won our first 2 games. On paper they were difficult ties. Blackburn away and Stoke at home. I watched the highlights of the Stoke game, and yeah, we won 3-1, but we could have quite easily lost that game 5 or 6-3. It's a results-based business though, so it's difficult to be frustrated. The biggest thing for me is that Roland has just historically, wherever he's been, even before he was at Charlton, has kind of run football clubs as a business, and not just a business in kind of making itself sustainable. It's all about turning a profit. So so
essentially he's the Belgian Stan Kroenke.
He is exactly the Belgian Stan Kroenke, although he doesn't necessarily negotiate quite as hard for player outgoings. We lost John Joe Shelby to Liverpool for £1 million. Ahern Grant left for Huddersfield for £2 million. There was talks of Lyle Taylor leaving on a fairly low fee to Brentford or Middlesbrough. Thankfully we resisted. I think he's going to be a key man for us this season. But we've just never really got that whole negotiating part down. We just seem to.
Yeah, but I do think a lot of Championship and League One clubs do struggle with that, because I remember a few seasons ago when Leyton Orient were on the verge of promotion to the Championship. When they lost that playoff final, they went and lost Moses Odubejo for a very nominal fee.
Heartbreaking. That was heartbreaking. Rotherham, I remember it because Leyton Orient are, the local club to where I live. If you discount West Ham, which is always sad, but a choice that I make quite openly. Orient over West Ham for sure, but that was sad to see. That was really sad to see, because they actually then got relegated the season after.
They went ahead and ended up with a double relegation, and ended up in the National League for 2 or 3 years. So
back to back. Similar thing happened to us, although we stopped our decline at League One, thankfully. But it's difficult. It's difficult. I recognise what you're saying, but then you look at some of the transfer fees that are being kind of, thrown around at the moment, and you've got, kind of Bristol City just sold a centre back to Brighton for £20 million.
That is just a ridiculous one, because I was reading up on this last night actually, and he played one season in the Championship for Bristol City, and then left for the Premier League for £20 million. Now, bearing in mind, this is Bristol City. This isn't someone that you'd expect to get promoted anyway.
Sure.
So I understand the reasoning behind him wanting to move, but in the same sense, before he was playing for Bristol, he was playing for Ipswich Town, who have now since been relegated to League One. So,
sure.
How good is he? Because Bristol City didn't make the playoffs last year.
Sure. It's difficult to assess. The problem being, and I don't agree with it, but because of the homegrown rules that are being, or have already been introduced, throughout the I suppose definitely the Premiership, but even in European competitions as well. Any British player costs a lot more these days than they did before that all came in. So I recognise that you do pay a premium, but when you kind of look at it from a balcony view, you're no longer on the dance floor, and you can kind of really look at everything that's happening in its entirety. When you're looking at players like Louise moving for £8 million. Now, obviously, Louise definitely didn't want to go to Brighton. Brighton probably couldn't afford to pay half of his wages. But if you look at the actual transfer fees that are being paid, it's just extortionate. It's extortionate, absolutely extortionate. And I can't see how it can continue to, I suppose, snowball. What we're going to find soon is that Neymar's transfer of 200 million euros to PSG is going to end up being broken by somebody that's kind of 1 year out of an academy and
I think for me the next person to break that transfer record is Jadon Sancho.
Do you think?
I would say so. I watch a lot of Bundesliga, and having watched a lot of him last season, watching him play for England in the Nations League, he's only getting started. And what is he, 19, 18, 19,
yeah,
20?
I think he's 19.
Yeah, and at 19 years of age, he's Borussia Dortmund's star player, and it really would not surprise me if this season they end up winning the league, because Bayern Munich are on a sharp decline.
They are.
Borussia Dortmund are just getting better.
So Dortmund just beat Munich in the German, I think it's the Super Cup or whatever, the German Charity Shield. Was 2-0, right? And actually Sancho scored and assisted in that game. So I definitely think he's a good player. If he moves this season, do I think it will be for a transfer fee that eclipses Neymar's? Maybe not. It depends what he does, I guess. But that's a shout. I certainly wouldn't disagree with it.
Yeah, I think if he
strongly.
continues his rise to prominence, then we will start seeing some extortionate. Because you have to remember, if he does move to a Premier League club, that club is then going to have to pay that English premium again.
Sure.
Because he was homegrown by Manchester City.
Yeah.
So it all depends, but just going back to the subject of owners, I think we have to kind of throw this in somewhere, and that is Mr. Mike Ashley of Newcastle United.
The gift that keeps on giving.
Do you know what it is? Okay, yeah, I feel sorry for the Newcastle fans, but there is a way to go about things. And I was watching the build up for the Arsenal game on Sunday, and I could see that these Newcastle fans that were supposed to be boycotting the games, not renewing their season tickets. It turned out that there was 300 people that turned up to protest on the day, and they marched from the Sports Direct shop to Newcastle United Stadium. Now, I don't know if you've been up to St James's Park, but that's not a long distance at all. You're talking maybe 5-10 minutes at most.
Yeah.
So the Newcastle fans do not help their case by the way they go about things. There is a way of going about things, and there is the power of social media. And I think Newcastle fans would serve themselves a lot better in, making their opinions heard over social media. Whether Mike Ashley's going to listen or not, it's more than likely that he's not.
Yeah.
But at least conduct yourself in the right way. Because, going down to the ground and screaming and shouting about it, you're not going to get yourself heard. You're just going to aggravate the other Newcastle fans that are there, that have actually just come to watch a game of football. They don't care about the owner.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
all you're going to do is divide the fan base, which no football club wants.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, you got to think, obviously, there's going to be a fairly big portion of the Newcastle fans that are, kind of under 16, for example. They might be attending games with their parents. It might even be the first game that they're attending, and they're around the ground. They can smell the food, they can see all the merchandise stands. They want to enjoy the game. They want to enjoy the experience, and I think when there's a small section of fans shouting, swearing, being escorted through the city by police, you're almost robbing those fans of their match day experience. Is 300 fans protesting really going to make a difference? No, it's not. All it's going to do is bring negative publicity towards Newcastle, which in the long run will harm its, I suppose, financial capability. Who's going to want to sponsor the club? Who's going to want to invest in them if they're just not in touch with the fans? And I recognise their frustrations. I think they're just broken their transfer record, signing Joel Linton, who looked okay against Arsenal. Don't get me wrong. £40 million is, I suppose, it is a lot of money, but in today's terms, it's not a massive amount of money. But I think if you look at, I think over his reign as owner of Newcastle, on average, I think it worked out to be around £7 million he spends per window, which isn't enough for a Premier League club. At least not if you look at someone like Aston Villa, just been promoted. They're outspending almost everybody in the Premier League, but outside of that, they're in the top 5 spenders in Europe. And I guess everybody wants their team to invest in players, but Newcastle, I think, are still living in the Alan Shearer, Faustino Asprilla days where they're just used to being in the Champions League. They expect to be higher up because of the stature of their club, but football's unforgiving. It's unforgiving.
Football is definitely unforgiving. I mean, if you look at a club like Newcastle, and just going back to the transfer quickly, everyone's saying, "Oh, I don't know why Newcastle fans are complaining. They've broken their transfer record this year." Yes, but they also sold their top goal scorer last year to Leicester for £30 million. So
True.
they might have broken their transfer record by spending 50 million, but really they've only spent 20.
Yeah.
So this whole thing of breaking the transfer record, transfer records don't mean anything anymore, because your transfer record for a player could be £5 million, and that was 15 years ago. To get a player of that quality now, you're looking at spending 50-60 million pounds. So it's definitely a difficult one, and for Newcastle fans, I've always liked and respected Newcastle as a club. So I understand where they're coming from, because I grew up supporting West Ham,
sorry.
Yeah, as I was growing up supporting West Ham, I went through the whole era of having the Icelandic owners, having Avram Grant as manager, being relegated down to the Championship, being in the Championship and not knowing what was going to happen with the club, because obviously this is during the recession, and the Icelandic owners had just completely run out of money. And then on top of that, during their tenure, we had the massive Tevez situation, which we ended up having to pay a massive fine for, and it was definitely a difficult situation to be in. I think for Newcastle to move forward, they need to get a new owner in. But the issue is going to be the asking price from Mike Ashley, because he is a businessman. And from what I understand, I believe the deal with the Saudi Arabian, the prince or whoever it was, the reason that deal broke down was because Mike Ashley still wanted to own the stadium.
Sure.
The stadium to be called the Sports Direct Arena.
Yeah.
And also wanted to withhold all of the rights for the merchandise, and that the merchandise for the club could only be sold in Sports Direct shops. Now, any
Yeah,
conscious prospective owner coming into Newcastle United is not going to agree to that deal,
sure.
because then
Absolutely not.
it leaves Mike Ashley with too much of a controlling interest in the club. He controls how the merchandise is sold, where it's sold. Essentially, he's still going to own the stadium.
Sure.
So, essentially, you're in a West Ham situation where you don't own your ground. You're just going to be paying rent, which is it's definitely it's a tricky situation to be in, and I just hope that Newcastle United can get it resolved relatively
Yeah,
quickly and
for
move
sure.
forward.
For sure. I completely agree with you. I think, any prospective owner that would get close to passing the fit and proper persons test is going to want to control, the elements that Mike Ashley's trying to retain. And you're absolutely right. When you don't own your stadium, you're in a bit of a situation. Look at Coventry, for example. They don't own the Rico Arena. Now, I must admit, I'm not sure if their situation has changed, but the last I saw that they were going to end up playing games at Birmingham. I don't know if that's changed or not.
Yeah, they've been evicted from the Rico Arena, and they're currently still looking for a new ground. But in the interim, they've had to go and a ground share with Birmingham, because they obviously were given a deadline by the EFL to go and find a stadium.
Yeah,
And they still need to. They couldn't resolve their issues with the Rico Arena.
yeah,
And I believe it's definitely there's definitely something shady going on behind the scenes there, because at the end of the day, for the arena, it's more revenue
yeah,
on a
absolutely,
match day.
for
But
sure.
I don't believe that Coventry City have the money in order to fund their home ground.
Yeah, the lease for sure. And you think
Uh,
if that situation happens in Newcastle and they're given, they're given a period of time to find alternative stadiums, the only stadium remotely big enough in that part of the world is going to be the Stadium of Light, and you can imagine how that's going to go down. So
Absolutely, but also the thing with Newcastle is, if you go up to Newcastle, you could literally speak to anyone on the street about football. It's a footballing city.
yeah, for sure, it's a culture.
Now, if anything were to happen to Newcastle Stadium, where Mike Ashley owns it and new owners come in, and Mike Ashley decides to evict them for whatever reason, there will be riots in Newcastle, and they will be gunning for Mike Ashley. So it's such a volatile situation at the moment. And I don't think anyone within the hierarchy at Newcastle knows what's going on. The fans want to know what's going on, but no one seems to be giving them any sort of information or indication as to what is actually happening.
It's crazy. It's crazy. How are situations like this allowed to to develop? How have the Premier League, how have the FA allowed this situation to happen? And it's sad because you'd expect a certain level of protection, but look at the EFL, for example. You got Bury, Bolton. It's it's sad, clubs go bust. It happened to Wimbledon. They reformed as AFC Wimbledon, and thankfully they're doing okay. They're doing all
Yeah,
right.
I mean, I think we should kind of save the whole Wimbledon story for another episode, because that's definitely something that I do, because I've got a soft spot for Wimbledon, because obviously growing up, Vinnie Jones was one of my favourite players, because
Yeah, sure.
I was born in 1996, but I used to love watching all the football from the 80s, and he was one of my favourite players. Tough tackling, no nonsense. And with Wimbledon, it wasn't a case of the club was going bust. It was a case of a new owner had come in, sold the ground, and made them homeless. Crystal Palace weren't willing to have a continuous ground share with them, so the owner decided to up and move the whole club to Milton Keynes and rename them. So, essentially, MK Dons is Wimbledon FC.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
But obviously, the fans of Wimbledon are kind of a fan-owned club now, and I had an email from a colleague of mine a couple of days ago, and Wimbledon are actually they're crowdfunding at the moment to try and get the funds together to start building their new stadium on Plough Lane, which is going to be, I think they said it was going to be about 100 yards from where the old Plough Lane Stadium is,
Yeah.
which is is definitely an exciting prospect, but definitely something we're going to touch on in a future episode. But I mean, going back to the Bury and Bolton situation, that is a very interesting one because it seems that the administrators have come in and overtaken Bolton. The first team players have either refused to play or moved on. But they are still competing, even if it is with a youth team.
Yeah. Who picked up their first point actually on the weekend against Coventry? Strangely enough, yeah. So it was a 0-0 draw.
The back of the checkbook.
It's an odd one because it was a 0-0 draw, right? And I think it was the youngest average age of a starting team in Football League history. So I think the average age of the Bolton starting lineup was 18.2 years. It was something ridiculous. The oldest player was 24. Now I've seen a picture on Twitter of the squad photo, and it looks like something you would see, over Hackney Marshes on a Saturday or a Sunday morning. It's just generic youth players, to the point where I know you're a keen gamer, and I've seen some of your videos around the closed beta of FIFA 20, and Bolton's squad list is made up of fake players. Now, Bolton have been, I suppose, a club that certainly back in the day under Sam Allardyce, they were top end of the Premiership, and now they find themselves in a situation where they're 11 points off of bottom place because they were given a 12-point deduction for entering into administration anyway. And literally FIFA had to create players called fake player. When I say fake players, they haven't done what Pro Evo used to do, where they didn't have licenses and just kind of called people whatever they want. They've literally called them fake player, and it's just such a sad situation. It's such a sad situation to see a football club, professional football club, big stadium, bit of history, just literally reduced to next to nothing.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting situation, but I feel that right now Bolton are in a much better situation than Bury are, because
I agree with that.
Because Bury is still paying their players, they're still paying the wages of their staff, but because of what's going on behind the scenes with their finances and the money that they owe to creditors and things like that, the EFL are not comfortable in allowing them to compete.
Yeah.
Now, the situation as it stands right now is they still remain in the EFL with a 12-point deduction at the bottom of League One. But if they cannot provide sufficient evidence to the EFL by the 23rd of August, then their EFL membership will be revoked.
Yeah,
indefinitely.
Terminated for sure.
So that's instantly that's going to bump them down to non-league. Now that causes a massive headache from the Football League all the way down to the National League, because then you're only looking at 3 teams being relegated, but Bury would already be a relegated side.
Yeah.
Now, for the National League, what happens? Because if Bury drops down, that's an additional team for next season in the National League.
Sure.
So does that mean that you're going to have to promote 3 teams to the EFL? The lateral movements within the pyramid are going to be very, very interesting. It'll be interesting to see what the EFL and the National League do to kind of facilitate that, if it does come to it. I do understand that the owners put them up for sale, and he's essentially come out and said that he's done all he can.
Yeah,
and
it's my understanding somebody wants to buy them. That's my understanding, that there's an offer in for the club, and someone's trying to purchase them, but I suppose the red tape, the bureaucracy, the processes around kind of fit and proper owners, which are set by the EFL actually, is slowing that down. So it's almost a double-edged sword, because they've been given a deadline for, I think, as you said, it was the 23rd or the 26th of August, where they need to submit proof of funds, where it's going to come from, so that they can pay off their creditors, exactly as you said. But it's that same process set by the EFL around who can take ownership of a football club, which is preventing them from meeting that deadline. And you'd like to think that the powers that be show a little bit of sense. They've already postponed their third fixture for this weekend. They're not allowing them to play any games, but they're also not allowing them to be sold quick enough, and they're just not going to be able to meet that deadline.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the EFL are looking at it from a pragmatic point of view, in the sense that Bury have had the whole of pre-season since the end of last season to make their moves and get the finances in place for the start of the season. That hasn't happened. They then postponed their first game to allow them to get their finances in order. That hasn't happened. They've had a league game, a Carabao Cup game, and then another league game this weekend, which they've all been suspended because Bury still haven't been able to prove what is going on with their finances and where the money's going to come from. Now, for me as a prospective owner going into a football club, if I'm going in there knowing that I'm going to have to outlay, let's say, £750,000 before the players can even cross the white line, that's going to put serious doubt into my mind because yes, it's a football club, but it has to be a business. It has to. If it's not turning a profit, it's not going to survive. I've run Sunday League teams for the last 6-7 years. If the team does not generate money to cover your losses over the course of the season and take you into the following season, then it's not financially viable and it can't continue. And it has to be very, very have to look at it in that sense.
Yeah.
If it means going down to the National League, rebuilding, paying off their creditors, and then working their way back up, then that's what needs to happen. But it's crazy to think that Bury were promoted from League Two last year.
They were.
And the prize money associated with that would have been a substantial amount as it is. So the question on it, I think everyone's lips at the moment is, where has that money gone? How much do they actually owe? And what be in place before we can compete?
So I was just doing some reading on that this morning actually, and the club does have to sustain itself. You're absolutely right. I think it's 3.2 million that they need to prove that they can generate to be able to enter the CVA, and it needs to be met by, I guess, the new owners and not the current owner. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in that situation. But Bury are a long-standing football club. They were founded 134 years ago. 134 years ago, and it's just look. Businesses go bust. I get it. You look at household names like Woolworths and Blockbuster, for example. They were kind of staples of the high street. They're no longer around. They didn't move with the times, right? But football is an evolving picture. It always changes. Regulations come in, they change. But as you said, they had a successful year last year. They're coming off the back of successes, and they would have known the financial, I suppose, set of circumstances around it, and you would have thought that they would have been prepared for whatever obligations they would have had under certain agreements. But to put a figure on it, I think it was 3.2 million is what they needed to be able to show line of sight to in order to satisfy their unsecured creditors, and in turn then the English Football League.
Yeah, I mean, like I was just saying, for a prospective owner coming in, are they really going to be able to sit there and lay out £3.2 million of their own money to enter a CVA to even get through the season?
And would you be willing to do that when there's no guarantee that even once you've kind of demonstrated that you could do that and you were willing to do that, that the EFL will still continue to allow you to compete?
This is the major issue, and the major issue that I have with the EFL right now is if you look over the last 2-3 years and the amount of clubs that have gone into financial trouble within the EFL, why are the EFL not actively checking the owners, these owners and their businesses to see what the situation is? Because I can see that owners are going to be taking money out of the club to fund their own business if it's not going well, which then puts the club into trouble. Now, the club, I can guarantee you, every owner in the EFL, the club is not their only business.
Sure.
So, for the clubs that are going into financial struggle, I think it needs to be a case of it needs to be investigated. And I was watching Can't Pay Will Take It Away the other day. and believe it or not, Swindon Town were on there.
Okay, cool.
For unpaid money to a previous owner.
Yeah.
And the owner was just, all the staff were being very dismissive. They were being they wouldn't speak to the people that were there at all. And it ended up getting to a point where they just turned around and said, "Look, you've got until 5 o'clock. If we don't have some sort of payment before then we're going to start removing goods."
Yeah.
And that's when all of a sudden somebody got an owner on the phone and somebody, you know how it works.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
the
Absolutely.
it's crazy to think that these clubs are being put into these positions and nobody knows why.
Yeah. And it's through no fault of the fans either. Let's bear a fault for the fans of Bury. In the scenario you described, the fans of Swindon. It's difficult because you're putting your hard-earned money into the club, and it's just disappearing. It's not that there's no investments. It's not even covering existing overheads.
Absolutely.
And I think it's just allowed to continue over a period of time where you bury your head in the sand so much that eventually you can no longer get it out. You can't breathe, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, but thankfully it doesn't happen as regularly or to the extremities that we're seeing at the moment. And hopefully that's a sign that it's isolated to individuals as opposed to a systematic failure via the Football League to I suppose put their members, because after all they are members of the EFL, to put their members at risk.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can fully agree with that. But looks like we're gonna have to stop here. It's been a very, very open and honest discussion. But I'm hoping that we're gonna be back on Friday, so we can do a preview of the weekend's football.
Sure.
And hopefully help out some of our fantasy football fans with team selection. You never know. But yeah, if you did listen and you did enjoy, make sure to follow us on Spotify and give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. And yeah, we'll see you guys in the next one.
Thanks for listening.